We don't know how we're going to end this month of Ramadan, in our homes, in a tent, by the sea in the north, or in the south.
As the Muslim holy month begins, people in Gaza contend with extreme hunger. Muslims outside Gaza are praying for peace and say their observances this year are tinged with grief. Welcome to Your World Tonight. I'm Stephanie Skandaris. Also on the program, reflecting on Canada's longest war.
Many of us have asked and have been asking, was it worth it? And the answer to that question is deeply personal.
Taking stock of the mission 10 years after Canadian troops left Afghanistan. We'll also check in with women athletes from Afghanistan who are now living in exile. And it's Oscar night, and we'll bring you all the buzz from Hollywood. Canada is set to join an international coalition working to get aid to Gaza through a humanitarian sea corridor. Foreign Affairs Minister Melanie Joly announced Canada's commitment after a meeting in Dubai with officials from the United Arab Emirates. No details have been released, but the European Commission says it has an aid ship ready to set sail from Cyprus for Gaza as the first step in establishing a maritime corridor. Philip Lee-Shannock reports.
As Israel controls most of the territory's land crossings, the U.S. and other countries have turned to airdropping aid into Gaza. Mohammed Harara, who lives in Gaza City, was among the thousands sifting through already picked over remnants of food aid. Tins get crushed, dates spread on the ground, he says. Everything is destroyed. It's wasted. Canada says it's working on being part of the air missions, which have been criticized as inefficient, even deadly, with reports that 5 people were killed by a falling aid crate when its parachute failed. United Nations agencies warn it's still not enough for almost 2.5 million people. Georgios Petropoulos is with the UN Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs in Gaza. He says thousands of people are at risk of dying of starvation, made worse by a collapsed health system.
The situation is so desperate that the moment you enter North Gaza with food, people immediately come to take it from you. So you cannot actually immediately guarantee a safe or organized distribution.
Today in Cyprus, the Open Arms, a ship owned by a Spanish NGO, is ready to set sail for Gaza, loaded with tons of aid, canned food, flour, and rice. While only enough to feed a fraction of the millions there, Christopher Gunnis, former spokesperson for the United Nations Relief and Works Agency, says it's a start.
I think it can make a huge difference to establish a substantial maritime corridor between the port of Larnaca in Cyprus and Gaza.
He says if successful, more food will follow, enough to feed millions of people in a matter of days. Minister of Foreign Affairs Melanie Joly says Canada is ready to join the effort, although no details were released. The United States sent its own ship today, the General Frank S. Besson, with equipment to build a temporary pier in Gaza to receive humanitarian supplies. That could take at least 2 months. And Israel says it will monitor any aid shipments into Gaza, says Boaz Bismuth, a member of Israel's ruling Likud party.
If by any chance this aid coming by the EU, by the United States, by any country you can mention, any organization, if the Hamas is involved in distributing this aid, this will be a big failure from Israel.
Hampering humanitarian efforts and say plans for aid delivery by sea will take too long. And they say land access is the most efficient way to get aid into Gaza quickly. Philip Lee-Shannock, CBC News, Toronto.
U.S. President Joe Biden is trying to build momentum following his fiery State of the Union address. Biden and former President Donald Trump held dueling rallies over the weekend, both offering their starkly different visions to voters at campaign events in the battleground state of Georgia. As we hear from Katie Simpson, it's a preview of what the next 8 months of the election campaign could sound like.
Everything Joe Biden touches turns to shit.
That comment right there from former President Donald Trump at his Georgia re-election rally captures the sentiment and the tone of the message he delivered to voters. And they loved it. Thousands of people packed into an arena cheering on Trump's attacks against Joe Biden on everything from his policies to mocking the president's speech impediment.
2 nights ago, we all heard Crooked Joe's angry, dark, hate-filled rant. of a State of the Union address, wasn't it? Didn't it bring us together? Remember, he said, I'm going to bring the country together. I'm going to bring it together.
The crowd became even more energized when Trump spoke of immigration. Before the rally, he met with the parents of Lake Ann Riley, the 22-year-old Georgia nursing student who was murdered while out for a jog. An undocumented immigrant who crossed illegally into the U.S. and was allowed to stay has been arrested and charged in Riley's killing.
Lake and Riley would be alive today if Joe Biden had not willfully and maliciously eviscerated the borders of the United States.
Riley's murder has become a campaign issue as part of a larger debate around immigration policy. During the State of the Union address, Republicans heckled Biden, demanding he acknowledge her death.
Lincoln Riley, an innocent young woman who was killed by an illegal. That's right.
Using the word illegal in that context drew criticism from progressive voters. And not long after, during an interview with MSNBC News, Biden said he now regrets how he phrased that comment.
And I shouldn't have used illegal. It's undocumented. And look, when I spoke about the difference between Trump and me, one of the things I talked about on the border was that the way he talks about vermin, the way he talks about these people polluting the blood. I talked about what I'm not going to do, what I won't do. I'm not going to treat any of these people with disrespect.
Ensuring voters see a clear contrast between Biden and Trump on everything, from language and tone to policy to the overall vision for America, is a key part of the Democrats' re-election bid. Overall, though, Biden's team views his State of the Union address as a major success that helped set a fundraising record. The Biden campaign says in the 24 hours after his speech, they collected $10 million in donations, the most ever in that short a time frame. It adds to their already significant fundraising advantage, leading Republicans by millions of dollars this early in the campaign. Katie Simpson, CBC News, Washington.
The situation in Haiti is extremely serious.
Canada's ambassador to the UN, Bob Ray, says the world must act fast to address a worsening crisis in Haiti. Gangs have rampaged through the capital, Port-au-Prince, threatening to bring down the government and forcing thousands of Haitians from their homes. Ray will meet with officials from the U.S. and several other countries in Jamaica tomorrow to discuss the situation.
We are really going to try to see not only how do we encourage the Haitians to create a successful transition, but how do we make sure that we're able to respond to the criminal activities which have taken over the country.
Supplies of basic goods are running low, and with the city's main port and airport both closed, getting aid in is all but impossible. Jean-Marc Biquet is the program manager for Doctors Without Borders in Haiti. He says the situation is getting worse by the day.
MSF has a hospital taking care of wounded people in Tabar, which is close to the airport. We saw an increase of patients arriving, notably the patients suffering of bullet wounds, mainly stray bullets. We were forced to increase the capacity of the hospital.
Last night, the U.S. military airlifted some non-essential staff out of its embassy in Port-au-Prince. There are nearly 3,000 Canadians registered in Haiti. A spokesperson for Global Affairs Canada tells CBC News that a travel advisory for that country was updated on March 7th, but it is not planning any repatriation flights. Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky is rejecting calls from Pope Francis to negotiate an end to the war with Russia. The Pope made the remarks to a Swiss broadcaster, saying continuing the fight will only lead to more deaths. Ukraine and a number of its allies have strongly condemned the Pope's remarks. Still ahead, we'll hear from the Afghan athletes who once represented their country on the world stage, but have now been forced into exile because they are women, and their call to the international community. That story's coming up on Your World Tonight. In BC, as the number of drug-related deaths has climbed higher, the number of autopsies performed has plummeted. Most overdose deaths in the province don't receive an autopsy. Experts warn that could be obscuring critical death data, from diseases to toxic drugs, even homicides. As John Hernandez reports, many families feel deprived of answers.
I don't want anyone to go through this. It is heart-tearing.
Greg Sword stands in the Port Coquitlam Park where he would take his daughter Camila to play when she was a kid. He says it's the same place she bought the prescription opioid hydromorphone the night before she died.
My mom actually found her body at 8 o'clock in the morning. She was curled up in a fetal position. And then when I got there, the cops were there and they would not allow me to see my daughter until she was in a body bag.
Based on toxicology results, the coroner concluded the 14-year-old died from cardiac arrhythmia after using cocaine and MDMA. Hydromorphone was also found in the teen's blood. Sword wonders if it might have factored into her death.
I assumed that they were going to do an autopsy, but they didn't.
To me, the cause of Camila Sword's death is undetermined.
Forensic pathologist Matthew Ord isn't convinced by the coroner's report.
It could be explained by drug toxicity, but there may be other factors at play that haven't been assessed by virtue of the lack of an autopsy.
BC's autopsy rate has fallen dramatically since 1991. It sits at just 3.2% of all deaths, the second lowest rate in the country next to Quebec. Without autopsies, Ord says death investigations could be missing out on critical information like disease, illicit drugs, even foul play.
The low autopsy rate it's a scandal. It means that we are unable to identify how and why it is our loved ones have died.
The coroner's service says the rate is low because of the number of fatal overdoses in BC, and that toxicology tests often mean autopsies are not necessary. But Dr. John Butt, the man who founded Alberta's physician-led medical examiner system, disagrees. In 2022, Alberta's system performed 2,000 more autopsies than in BC. Butt points out that unlike medical examiners, coroners in BC don't have medical training, but still decide whether or not a death warrants an autopsy.
In a system like there is in British Columbia, it wants badly for medical direction.
Officials in BC say they've been pouring more money into BC's coroner's service since the onset of the overdose crisis. The province is currently looking for a new chief coroner. Premier David Eby says part of their job will be to find ways to improve the system. John Hernandez, CBC News, Port Coquitlam.
It has been a difficult and poignant day for many Canadians. 1 decade has passed since the country ended its mission in Afghanistan. A solemn ceremony was held in Ottawa to mark the anniversary. As Murray Brewster explains, the event was as much about honouring lives lost as it was for reflecting on lessons learned.
It has been 10 years since Canadian troops boarded these helicopters under a blinding Afghan sky, the first homeward-bound leg in the journey between war and peace. Sunday, on the cold, grey, rain-soaked square around Canada's National War Memorial, several dozen veterans and dignitaries gathered to remember the end of the country's longest war.
Many of us have asked and have been asking, was it worth it?
General Wayne Eyre is Canada's Chief of the Defence Staff. He was in Kabul when the Canadian flag came down in 2014 and is also a combat veteran who mentored Afghan troops to take up the fight themselves, a fight they ultimately lost.
But we can hold our heads high knowing that we did everything that our government asked us to do. Our members served with valor.
The war in which 40,000 Canadian troops served and 158 lost their lives had largely slipped into history even before this 10th anniversary. The Liberal government has been struggling to erect a separate monument to their sacrifice, as the military today deals with outdated equipment and struggles to recruit and hold on to troops. Historian Sean Maloney says Canadians have problems talking about war unless it's the Second World War.
Have we come to grips with Somalia? Have we come to grips with Rwanda? So if we're expecting to come to grips with Afghanistan, and we haven't even discussed all of these other things that took place in the decade beforehand, then how can we have a conversation?
Maloney says Canadians were reluctant to talk about why we were there even before the Taliban roared back to power in 2021, reimposing its brutal rule and undoing everything Canada and its allies fought to achieve.
I was a teenage girl who had been banned from school for almost 5 years.
Frozan Rahmani is a former Afghan journalist who now lives in Canada.
With Canada's intervention, I was being able to go back to school and gave me a sense of freedom and hope. It was like a new beginning for me. I got chance to pursue my education and work towards a better life.
Ramani was driven into exile not by the Taliban, but by the corrupt regime that preceded it. On this day, she says she thinks of the Canadian soldiers who lost their lives in order to ensure she had a future, even though that future is not what she envisioned. Murray Brewster, CBC News, Ottawa.
Since the Taliban retook control of Afghanistan in 2021, women and girls are barred from playing sports, and those who once played can face intimidation, even death threats, forcing them underground or into exile. Some of those exiled women are pushing global sports bodies like the International Olympic Committee to stand up against gender discrimination. Freelance reporter Murli Krishnan met up with some of those Afghan women at a conference in Norway and brings us this report.
Women are facing a lot of challenges, even getting out of their house.
The former captain of Afghanistan's women's national soccer team says fear runs high for women in her home country. Khalida Popal now lives in Denmark, where she sought asylum in 2011 after facing death threats. She says when the Taliban retook power in Afghanistan 10 years later, things got even worse for women and girls who play sports.
Women are not allowed to do any sport, even going to the gym is also forbidden.
This is echoed by Priya Rezai, who now lives in Canada. The judoka was one of the first women to compete for Afghanistan at the Olympics. Rezai says more than 130 athletes in Afghanistan need to be evacuated.
Afghanistan is not a country for women anymore, and I believe that all the Afghan women are refugees now.
At the recent Play the Game conference in Trondheim, Norway, both women pushed the sporting community to pay more attention to women in Afghanistan, who they say have been failed by global sports bodies like FIFA.
For women to kick the ball, ask questions, raise their voice, that was difficult, and that was not allowed for women and girls.
Khalida Popal wants soccer's governing body to recognize Afghanistan's women's team, who now live in exile in Australia.
The players who managed to get out of Afghanistan with the support of international organizations are fighting for their right to represent Afghanistan from diaspora.
FIFA statutes prohibit gender discrimination, but the association says it cannot recognize any team that is not first recognized by its country's national governing body. For Popal, FIFA's refusal to take action show that its policies are no more than lip service.
Walking the talk is not happening, and there is a huge gap, and Afghanistan is one of the examples.
Jens Anderson agrees. He's the international director and founder of Play the Game. He says if the Taliban refuses to play ball with FIFA's rules, then FIFA and other sports bodies should cut ties with Afghanistan.
International organizations in sport should simply suspend cooperation with Afghanistan in all sports until they have secured non-discrimination in Afghan sport, that women should have free access without any restriction put on them.
This has happened before. In 1999, the International Olympic Committee suspended Afghanistan's Taliban-run National Olympic Committee because it barred women's sports.
I want IOC to ban Afghanistan completely from the upcoming 2024 Paris Olympic Games because they have clearly violated the IOC Charter 50-50% gender ratio.
Priya Rezai says with the Olympic Games just months away, the time for the IOC to take action is now. Murli Krishnan for CBC News, Trondheim, Norway.
At least 19 people are dead and 7 missing after days of torrential rain caused flooding in West Sumatra, Indonesia. Search and rescue teams wade through flooded streets looking for anyone in need of help. More than 70,000 people have been forced out of their homes. Some are sheltering in nearby mosques where they can get food and water. With more rain in the forecast, local officials are warning there could be more damage from floods and landslides in the days to come. While the crescent moon has been spotted, meaning Ramadan is beginning for many of the world's Muslims, who will abstain from food and water from dawn to dusk for the next month. For Palestinians in occupied East Jerusalem, it's a somber start to the holy month, as they reflect on the war in Gaza and the Palestinians there who have no respite from their hunger, even after the sun sets. Margaret Evans brings us that story.
The old city, occupied East Jerusalem. There are glistening trinkets and enough sweets to make a child's eyes grow big as the Muslim holy month of Ramadan begins. But with Gaza's suffering top of mind, the mood amongst Palestinians here is low. The Grand Mufti of Jerusalem, Sheikh Mohammed Hussein, says Ramadan will be welcomed nonetheless. But where in all this, he's asking, is the international community that so boasts about humanity and civilization? A hoped-for ceasefire between Israel and Hamas in Gaza ahead of the fasting month has failed to appear, raising tensions in Jerusalem as Palestinian worshippers seek unimpeded access to Al-Aqsa Mosque on what they call the Noble Sanctuary and Jews call the Temple Mount. It is a flashpoint in this age-old conflict. Israeli border police often barring young Palestinian men, citing security concerns. And so they pray outside, and sometimes not only the young. What will stop the war is God Almighty, says this man, God and the resistance, a reference to armed Palestinian factions. Hamas has called on Palestinians to challenge Israel by going to Al-Aqsa in large numbers. Israel insists it won't restrict entrance unduly. Fears perhaps that to do so would risk more confrontation. This is spokeswoman Raquel Carmenson.
The entrance of worshippers to the Temple Mount will be permitted in similar numbers to previous years.
In Gaza, where despair feeds on those with little left to give, the approach of Ramadan brought with it more death. Witnesses in a camp for the displaced near Khan Yunis say at least 10 Palestinians were killed by Israeli artillery fire. There's nothing left of Ramadan or anything, says this survivor. My father, 3 sisters, a brother, and cousins. Everyone is gone. Further south in Rafah, even as they brace for a potential Israeli ground invasion, some are clinging to Ramadan, insisting on stringing lights and decorations if they find them, a reminder of who they are. We're not in our homes, we're in tents, says Abu Jabal, tying a rubber balloon. But we insisted on celebrating a small light in the dark. Margaret Evans, CBC News, Jerusalem.
In the UK, members of London's Jewish community blow traditional horns called shofars and demand Hamas release the remaining hostages held in Gaza. Coronation Street actress Maureen Lipman was among the speakers.
I'm an aunt, I'm a grandmother, and since October the 7th, I'm a hostage. Like every other Jew in the world, a hostage who shares that pain, that fear.
Egypt, Qatar, and the U.S. have been trying to mediate truce talks between Israel and Hamas that would include the release of more hostages, but the negotiations have been stalled for some time. You are listening to Your World Tonight from CBC News. I'm Stephanie Skandaris. You can hear Your World Tonight and other CBC radio programs wherever you are on your favorite podcast app. It is the 96th Academy Awards tonight, and film fans are waiting to see which movie will take home this year's top prize. Will it be the biopic about the creator of the atom bomb, the comedy about the world's most famous doll, or the celebrated French courtroom drama? For his take on tonight's Oscars, I spoke to Eli Glasner from Hollywood. Eli, yesterday you told us all about what an Oscar can mean for Canadian filmmakers, but there are lots of Canadians up for Academy Awards tonight. Can you take us through some of them?
There are so many this year, which is one of the reasons I'm so glad to be back covering the Canadian contingent. Let us begin with Celine Song, a Canadian director, playwright, screenwriter, and she is nominated in one of the screenplay categories for her remarkable film, Past Lives. And she's also, her movie is nominated for Best Picture. And then, small categories, Canada is always a big presence. You look at the short documentary, Ben Proudfoot created an amazing doc called The Last Repair Shop about kids in Los Angeles who get their musical instruments repaired. There's also a remarkable documentary about sexual assault in a small village in India called To Kill a Tiger. This is from Canadian Nisha Bahuja, and they're actually releasing this film globally on Netflix today, and so that really shows you how you can use that Oscar nomination to try and amplify your film and the conversation you're trying to create.
Despite all of the nominees, it feels like throughout this entire award season, from the Golden Globes to the BAFTAs, the SAG Awards, there's one title that everyone's been talking about, and that's Oppenheimer. What do you think? Can anything derail the Oppenheimer train from a Best Picture win?
No, not really. It has been locked and really been the one to beat since almost July. Remember how long ago it was when the whole Barbenheimer effect happened. And look, this is the kind of classic, ambitious period piece that the Academy loves, and so not surprised that nothing really can dethrone it. I mean, I think if you want to play the odds, a small chance maybe for the holdovers, but there really is a feeling when you talk to Academy members that this is Christopher Nolan's time, and that is why this is happening.
This is what I keep hearing, that it's got a lock on it, and so many other awards too. And I feel like, in recent Oscars history, there have been some surprising wins. I guess Moonlight, maybe, Parasite.
Sure.
But overall, do you think there's a predictability problem here?
Undoubtedly, every year, the award season gets longer and longer. And so with so many awards and so many festivals, you start to feel like you've been telling the same story, and there's been a narrative to this awards season for a while now. But also, you had the strike, so Hollywood really was kind of playing catch up. At the same time, there are always those surprises. There is going to be an award that is given out tonight that no one will predict. And there are some tight races. Emma Stone versus Lily Gladstone in the Best Actress race. That is Poor Things versus Killers of the Flower Moon. I don't think anyone loses in that contest, but it is just one of too few contests that are too close to call. But that's why the Oscars are also pulling out the stops with everything, including a musical number performed by our very own Ryan Gosling and an army of Kens. That's a nice little treat.
For sure. Well, we'll see who or what shakes things up tonight. And hey, we can always rely on Ryan Gosling, I guess, for that.
Exactly.
Thanks so much, Eli.
My pleasure.
There are other performances at the Oscars ceremony tonight. All of the nominees for Best Original Song, including this one. It's Wajaji, a song for my people, from Killers of the Flower Moon, a movie composed by the late, great Canadian Robbie Robertson. This song is by Scott George and sung by the Osage tribal singers. But will it take home the top prize?
Flaming hot Cheetos! Flaming hot Cheetos!
Put out the flame, nothing can hold you back.
It'll come up against this, The Fire Inside from Flamin' Hot, the Eva Longoria-directed film about the not exactly totally true origins of Flamin' Hot Cheetos. But with all due respect to songwriter Diane Warren, this one is only the second favorite choice.
I don't know how to feel, but someday I might.
Billie Eilish and her song What Was I Made For from Barbie is widely expected to claim the trophy, which makes sense. The Oscars are known for picking a serious ballad over something more fun, something with more energy.
'Cause I'm just kidding. Anywhere else I'd be, is it my
And that's our own Canadian Ryan Gosling. His performance of I'm Just Ken will be alongside songwriters Mark Ronson and Andrew Wyatt. Will it win? Probably not, but that's okay. In fact, it's Kenuff. And that's enough of that. On Your World Tonight, I'm Stephanie Skandaris. Thank you for being with us. Good night.
I'm just Ken.